I mean, obviously I teach from a non-binary perspective in terms of gender and sexuality. And I wonder, and in fact one of the questions I ask students in the sexuality class is this idea of imagining a genderless society, if you would. And few of them are able to really imagine that. And I can imagine it. I really can. I mean, genderless in terms of a binary, you know, in terms of roles, in terms, you know, it would take away the binaries of sexual orientation and, you know, what that is, and it would just be about individuals, and we do what we're compelled to do, and we sleep with who we're compelled to sleep with, and it's not really defined based on anything that's related to sex or gender. It seems like I can imagine that as a utopia.
Could you envision a change in maybe the language that we use in order to make sure that we're not speaking in terms of labeling something as this or that, but more as a melding of just everything?
Yeah.
Do you think that's possible?
I don't know how possible it would be to undo, you know, and I suppose if you look at it over time, that happens, but it just seems like it would take a long time to undo just even the cognitive mapping, if you will, that leads to, I mean, even electricians talk about you need a male and a female end. I mean, it permeates so many things that there's the outie and the innie is what is normal and normalized. And so I do think it would be a total shifting of language on a lot of, not just about humans.
A lot of the novels that we've been reading, even the utopian visions that are in these novels talk about there's still in some way, shape, or form a division in gender roles, and a lot of it is still the same kind of patriarchal. Women are allowed to do these things, but there's still even instances where in these novels there are things that are considered just like women's work. Or one aspect of Starhawk's novel that I thought was really interesting was how there's a council, like a defense council, and how they wanted to keep it strictly women because of the fact that throughout history it had been male dominated. Do you think that in those senses, if we were to do things like that in the society, to take something that was male dominated and say, just hypothetically speaking, that it shifted, do you think that would cure the problem of there being a binary between gender, or do you think it would just make it the same, only in a different light? So still not fully curing the whole separation. Yeah,
well, I suppose depending on your philosophy, I mean, like sociobiologists would say that people might still land on something that we previously understood as a binary sex or gender. But in my mind, if you got rid of any previous notion, like if I could snap my fingers and there's no previous notion of male, female, binary, what that means or looks like, would we create categories? I mean, yeah, social psychologists say we would. So from the psychological field, it's probably we would sort ourselves into something and lightly put labels on it. And that's not, and I still don't, I wouldn't call that utopia from a feminist, or my definition of feminist, humanist. I don't know. It'd be a fun experiment, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
say take a magic potion and just see how we all can express ourselves. I think particularly for male-identified, embodied individuals, it's so narrow. As a woman, I feel more of a pants yesterday, a dress today. You know, that it just would be interesting to see how people's expression was able to be freed. And then maybe you'd end up with more males who were part of the feminine council.
I feel like there would be a lot less restriction, especially in terms of, because there wouldn't be that struggle for power position, because people wouldn't be, it wouldn't be something that they were concerned with, I feel. And I feel like that would be a very utopian aspect of
Yeah.
society, if that would
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking about the, I'm not very good at remembering, the, a type of primate colony where because of some big altercation, all of the males in a certain age range, the kind of reproducing range, were wiped out. And the next generation became a much more peaceful, passive.
Bonobos.
Is that the bonobos? Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. So could we, what we call, inborn, innate maleness, especially if you go to any epigenetics. I don't know if you talked anything about that in any of your classes, but this idea that a nurture environment, what we think of as an environmental environment, changes the expression of the DNA as soon as the next generation. So that that's fascinating to me. So that if my parent generation experienced a traumatic event, I think it helps to explain, ancestral trauma type experiences and what manifests them. And it actually changes what expresses itself. It doesn't change your DNA, but it changes the expression of your DNA. So that's what I think maybe is potentially what happened with that bonobos. I can never say it right. So,
That reminds me of like a study that was done. I heard that there was a Swedish psychologist who did a study, and it was on rats, and it was on like the population. They were just given a certain area to live in, and they just let them keep populating without expanding the area. And what they noticed was that there became larger instances of homosexual activity and a decrease in I guess mating, you would say.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that falls along the same lines, but I feel like maybe there are definitely certain influences,
Sure.
things like that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we want to survive as a species, and I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but I think there's some interesting concepts. So that idea of if left to its own ability for equilibrium, like in things environmental, if we intervene in one way, then we tend to need to intervene in another way. What species do we need to kill in order to protect this next one? Like if left to its own devices, would we figure that out? And maybe that's a way of figuring it out. More questions than answers I have, sorry.
Well, that's fine. We just definitely appreciate your
No, it's Starhawk. I actually saw a student reading it in one of my classes, and I said, that's my favorite book I've ever read in my life. Like, it totally was transformational for me in terms of my thinking. And so many times I'll hear something on the news or be traveling somewhere and think, see, it's happening. Just like, it's happening. Look at water, the resources of water.
I feel like we should all focus more on the simple things like that, and how we actually do function and survive versus all these constructions that we made in order to deal with our society.
Yeah, right. And another example I was thinking of is there's a newer journal article out from evolutionary psychology, interestingly enough, talking about that it appears even from primate research that the new behavior required in order to survive is cooperation and collaboration, which is, instead of that, competition over scarce resources is our innate nature, that there's evidence to support that in order to survive, it will shift. Yeah, and so when that discipline, when a discipline like evolutionary psychology can start talking about those kinds of things, that's hopeful to me.